When I speak of wounds, I do not mean merely the shallow cuts that scar the skin, nor the bruises that fade with time upon the body. I speak instead of the deeper rupture, the fissure that splits the soul, invisible to the eye yet unbearable to endure. These wounds do not come from the blade of an enemy or the accident of chance, they are born from the weight of life itself, from the relentless pressure of existence. Every one of you carries such wounds. Most, however, hide them well. They are covered with the garments of civility, concealed behind the careful masks of personality. To the world, you seem whole. Yet beneath the surface, cracks spread silently. The empath cannot disguise his wounds so easily. He is marked by them, etched in the very fibers of his being. To feel more than others, to sense the mood of the room as though it were the very air filling his lungs, this is not a choice but a condition. He cannot step outside of his sensitivity any more than a fish can escape the water. For him, wounds are not occasional interruptions to life, they are woven into the fabric of existence itself. These wounds are both his curse and, paradoxically, his greatest weapon. You see, the empath is not born from ease, but from necessity. Comfort does not create such perception, survival does. The child who must watch every gesture of his parents, who must tune himself to every rise and fall of their mood simply to remain safe, becomes the adult whose awareness is sharpened like a blade. Out of pain grows perception. Out of wounds comes vigilance. The scar does not merely mark what once was, it trains the eye, it refines the ear, it shapes the soul. And so, though the empath may appear fragile to others, within him rests a sharpened instrument. It is no sword of steel, no weapon forged in fire, but a blade of sorrow, tempered in silence, honed by necessity. With this inner blade, he cuts through illusions that entangle others, the unconscious wastes nothing. Not even suffering is lost. It transforms all it touches. Just as the alchemist places base metal into fire until it yields gold, so too does the psyche take pain and refine it into vision. What once seemed only torment becomes, under the gaze of consciousness, a capacity for perception that few can rival. Yet perception alone is not salvation. For if it remains unconscious, if it is left unchecked, it can become a prison. The empath, in living through the feelings of others, risks losing his own boundaries. He may drown in the sea of projections, mistaking every shadow for his own. His gift becomes a curse, his wound a chain, unless he learns the art of discernment, the ability to know what belongs to him and what belongs to the other, what must be carried and what must be released. The empath's journey is not a path chosen freely, it is an inheritance, a burden pressed upon him long before he could speak its name. As a child, he did not set out to be sensitive, nor did he desire to feel the unspoken griefs of others. It was demanded of him by circumstance. Perhaps a parent was unpredictable, their mood shifting like a storm across the sea. Perhaps silence in the household was heavy with unspoken rage or sorrow. Perhaps love was conditional, bestowed only when the child anticipated needs, soothed anger, or absorbed despair. In such an environment, survival meant vigilance. The child became a seer, watching with eyes too large for his years, listening for the tremor in the voice, the flicker in the gaze, the sudden change in the atmosphere. This constant watchfulness carved deep grooves into the psyche. It was not simply a skill learned, but an orientation to the world, a way of being that could not later be unlearned. The empath grows into adulthood carrying within him the echo of that childhood, forever alert, forever scanning, forever feeling the emotional weather of the unseen. Others move through life with a certain indifference, unaware of the storm beneath the calm. But for the empath, there is no indifference. He feels what is denied, he sees what is hidden, he carries what others discard. And though the world may admire his compassion, the cost of such sensitivity is enormous. For he does not merely witness pain, he absorbs it. Here lies the paradox. The very wound that forced the child into hyper-awareness becomes the gift that allows the adult to pierce illusions. He knows when someone is lying, though no words are spoken. He senses betrayal long before it takes form. He recognizes sorrow in the eyes of a stranger, grief in the silence of a friend, fear in the tremble of laughter. He reads the language of the soul as easily as others read words upon a page. Yet this gift is double-edged. For in carrying what is not his, he risks losing himself entirely. To feel another's pain is one thing, to mistake it for one's own is another. And this is the great danger for the empath, that in his desire to heal others, he may abandon himself. The unconscious, however, is not cruel without purpose. It compels the empath into this burden so that eventually, if he can endure, he may learn the great art of individuation. To individuate is not to abandon compassion, but to anchor it in clarity. It is to say, this is mine, that is yours, this belongs to my soul, that belongs to yours. Without such boundaries, empathy becomes possession, and compassion becomes martyrdom. The empath dissolves into the suffering of others, losing all distinction, until he can no longer find the thread of his own being. But with discernment, with the courage to separate without abandoning, to feel without being consumed, the empath begins to wield his gift not as a wound, but as wisdom. To understand the empath fully, one must grasp a truth often overlooked: the gift of deep feeling is never born in peace. It is the scar tissue of survival, the residue of pain transformed into perception. What most call intuition is, for the empath, not some mystical talent given freely by nature, but the disciplined vigilance of a soul that has endured too much, too early. When others marvel at his ability to just know, they fail to see the years of silent suffering that sharpened this perception. They do not know the nights spent awake, listening for footsteps, or the childhood hours spent studying faces for signs of anger or rejection. They do not realize that what seems like insight is, in truth, the child's ancient defense against danger. And yet, from this survival skill emerges something extraordinary. The empath, through the refining fire of suffering, gains a vision that transcends mere instinct. He does not only read the gestures and words of others, he reads their silence. He listens to what is not said, sees what is hidden beneath masks, feels what even the speaker denies. In this way, he becomes both gift and threat to those around him. Gift, because he offers understanding where none is spoken. Threat, because he uncovers truths others desperately wish to keep concealed. Many cannot bear to be seen so nakedly, and thus they accuse the empath of overthinking, of imagining, of being too sensitive. But beneath such accusations lies fear, fear of being exposed, fear of being known. The empath, however, carries his own fear. For if his vision penetrates too deeply, if his heart absorbs too much, he begins to blur at the edges of his own identity. To live perpetually in the emotions of others is to risk forgetting the boundaries of self. He may begin to ask, who am I apart from what I feel from them? What is mine, and what is borrowed? Where do I end, and where do they begin? Without answers, he drifts into confusion, carrying pain not his own, fighting shadows not his battle, drowning in oceans that do not belong to him. His gift becomes his undoing. Here lies the great task of the empath, to transmute the wound into wisdom without allowing the wound to consume him. For the unconscious does not grant him sensitivity only to torment him. It offers, within the very structure of his suffering, the possibility of transformation. If he learns to set boundaries, to honor his own soul as distinct from the multitude of others, then his gift becomes sacred. He becomes healer not by absorbing, but by illuminating. He shows others what they cannot see in themselves, not because he carries their burden, but because he reflects their truth. The wound, once unbearable, becomes the very place where light enters. There is a strange irony in the life of the empath. Though he often appears fragile to the outer world, within him lies a resilience forged in silence. Most people imagine strength as hardness, as the ability to push back, to resist, to conquer. But the empath's strength is of another kind. It is not the strength of the sword but of water, soft, flowing, yet powerful enough to carve valleys through stone. It is not the strength of walls but of roots, hidden, patient, unyielding even to storms. This strength is born from having carried too much and survived still. What others call weakness is in truth the evidence of his endurance. Yet endurance alone is not enough. For many empaths live their entire lives trapped in cycles of giving, absorbing, and suffering, never reaching the higher purpose of their gift. They believe their task is to carry the pain of others endlessly, as if their existence were nothing more than a vessel for sorrow. But such living leads only to exhaustion, bitterness, and despair. The empath who does not learn discernment becomes a martyr without meaning, a healer who bleeds himself dry until nothing remains. He is praised for his kindness even as he silently decays. To move beyond this trap, the empath must awaken to the deeper call of individuation. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the great work of the soul, the journey by which a person becomes whole, not by imitating others, but by integrating the many hidden parts of the self. For the empath, individuation means learning the sacred boundary between self and other. It means realizing that to love does not require dissolving, and to heal does not require self-destruction. It means standing firmly in one's own center while still opening the heart to another. This is no easy task. For the empath has long equated love with self-abandonment, compassion with sacrifice, connection with absorption. To learn a new way is to confront the ancient wound itself, to return to the origin where survival first demanded this sensitivity. He must face the fear that if he stops carrying others, he will lose them. He must endure the terror that if he does not please, he will no longer be loved. But in confronting these fears, he discovers a deeper truth, that love rooted in self-erasure is not love at all, but dependency and illusion. True love requires presence, and presence requires selfhood. Only when the empath claims his own being can his gift truly become a blessing. Thus, the wound leads him back to himself. What began as survival becomes wisdom. What felt like a curse becomes initiation. He learns that the soul does not call him to be a savior, but to be whole. And from that wholeness, his presence heals, not by taking on what is not his, but by showing others that their pain, too, can be transformed. The path of the empath, once it begins to unfold toward awareness, is not one of escape but of transformation. He cannot run from his sensitivity, nor can he amputate it as one might remove a diseased limb. Sensitivity is not an addition to his being, it is woven into his very essence. To reject it would be to reject life itself. The true task, therefore, is not to silence or numb his perception, but to transmute it, to turn the very wound that once enslaved him into the wisdom that liberates him. Transformation, however, is never gentle. It is as if the soul demands that he re-enter the fire which once nearly destroyed him, not to be consumed this time, but to be refined. Old memories surface, memories of neglect, of rejection, of conditional love. Old patterns return, the impulse to absorb, to please, to carry what is not his. The empath feels as though he is reliving the very childhood he thought he had left behind. But this time, something is different. He is no longer a helpless child. He is conscious. He has language, awareness, strength. He can now look at what once overwhelmed him and say, "This is what happened, but this is not who I am. This is where the wound began, but this is not where it must end." Through this process, the empath discovers the deeper dimension of his gift. For empathy, at its highest expression, is not about carrying another's suffering but about bearing witness to it. To carry is to take it into oneself, to witness is to reflect it back with clarity and compassion. When the empath shifts from carrying to witnessing, he ceases to drown in the sea of others' pain and instead becomes a mirror in which others see their truth more clearly. His presence heals, not because he bleeds for others, but because he shows them that their suffering can be seen without judgment and without fear. But here lies another paradox: the more the empath learns to stand within his own boundaries, the deeper his compassion becomes. For boundaries do not limit love, they protect it. Without them, love collapses into codependency and exhaustion. With them, love becomes steady, resilient, enduring. The empath who once believed he must lose himself to love discovers that true intimacy is only possible when both selves remain intact. What he once feared, that boundaries would distance him, proves false. Instead, they allow him to draw nearer without being consumed. Thus, the empath comes to embody a rare wisdom, that pain is not something to be avoided or absorbed, but something to be transformed. His own suffering becomes the crucible in which he learns this truth, and through him, others learn it as well. He becomes a living symbol of alchemy, showing that wounds are not the end of the story, but the very place where the story of transformation begins. As the empath deepens into this work of transformation, he begins to see that his journey is not merely personal, it is archetypal. His life enacts a drama that echoes across generations, a pattern older than himself. For wherever there has been suffering, there have been souls born into families or societies who carry the weight of what others refuse to face. The empath belongs to this lineage, the unseen healers, the silent witnesses, the ones who feel what the collective represses. His sensitivity is not just about his parents or his childhood, it is about the unfinished business of humanity itself. He becomes the vessel in which unspoken griefs, denied fears, and hidden wounds find expression. But this role, noble as it may sound, is perilous. To serve as a vessel for the unconscious is to walk a narrow line between illumination and destruction. Too much identification with the suffering of the world, and he collapses beneath its weight. Too much detachment, and he becomes cold, cut off, a mere observer. The task is balance, to remain permeable enough to feel, yet rooted enough to endure. This balance is what transforms empathy into wisdom. Without it, he is consumed. With it, he becomes a guide, not only for himself but for others. Jung reminds us that what is not made conscious returns as fate. The empath's very life is proof of this. The wounds denied by a parent become the wounds carried by the child. The emotions silenced in one generation resurface, louder and sharper, in the next. To be an empath is often to be chosen, unwillingly, as the bearer of what the family, or even the culture, has refused to face. This is why his suffering feels larger than himself, because it is. He is carrying more than his own story, he is carrying the unfinished stories of many. Yet here again lies the invitation, to carry does not mean to be crushed. To feel does not mean to dissolve. If the empath can bring these inherited wounds into consciousness, if he can speak what was silenced, name what was hidden, honor what was denied, then the cycle begins to shift. What was fated becomes transformed. What was unconscious becomes conscious. And in this act, not only does he free himself, but he frees those who came before and those who will come after. His wound becomes the place where ancestral pain is finally met, acknowledged, and released. This is why the empath's path, though lonely, is profoundly significant. He is not merely surviving his own life, he is participating in the healing of a larger field, a collective psyche. His gift, once misunderstood even by himself, becomes a bridge, between past and future, between the individual and the collective, between suffering and meaning. He shows that the burden of sensitivity, when faced with courage, can become the seed of transformation not only for one soul, but for many. In time, the empath discovers that his journey is not only about enduring pain but about discovering the meaning hidden within it. For pain without meaning crushes, but pain transformed into purpose redeems. The same sensitivity that once seemed a curse begins to reveal itself as a doorway to depth. Where others are content with surfaces, the empath is compelled to enter the depths. Where others look away from suffering, he has already stared into its heart. This capacity gives him access to truths most never dare to face. He learns that darkness is not merely to be feared, but to be understood, not merely to be endured, but to be integrated. This is why so many empaths find themselves drawn to roles of healer, counselor, artist, or guide. They are not satisfied with appearances, nor are they content with the shallow comforts of distraction. They seek the marrow of experience, the essence of what it means to be human. Their work, whether through words, art, or silent presence, often carries a quality that touches others beyond explanation. For it is born not of theory, but of lived experience. They do not speak of wounds as abstract ideas, they speak of wounds as places they themselves have inhabited. And this authenticity is what gives their presence its healing power. Yet the danger remains. For in continually tending to others, the empath risks neglecting his own soul. He may confuse service with self-erasure, compassion with endless giving, love with the abandonment of his own needs. To truly embody his gift, he must learn that service without selfhood is hollow. The most powerful healing arises not when the empath dissolves into others, but when he stands firmly in his own being while offering his presence. His light does not shine brighter by extinguishing himself, but by burning steadily, rooted in the clarity of his own essence. This realization marks a turning point. The empath begins to see that his path is not about carrying everyone, but about becoming whole within himself. From that wholeness, his presence radiates naturally, without effort, without depletion. Others feel seen in his company not because he takes their pain into himself, but because his wholeness reminds them of their own. He becomes, in a sense, a mirror of possibility. His very existence testifies that wounds can be survived, that scars can be transmuted, that suffering can be woven into meaning. And so, the empath moves from survival to service, from burden to blessing, from wound to wisdom. What began as an unconscious compulsion becomes a conscious choice. He is no longer a child reacting to danger, but an adult who chooses presence. He is no longer defined by what others demand of him, but by the truth of his own soul. In this way, the empath not only heals himself but becomes a beacon for others. An embodiment of the alchemical truth that even in the darkest wounds, light waits to be revealed. At the end of this long journey, the empath comes to recognize that his wound was never meant to be a prison, but a passage. What once felt like punishment is revealed as initiation. The suffering that nearly destroyed him becomes the very fire through which his soul is refined. He begins to see that his gift was not accidental, nor merely personal, but archetypal, a part of the great story of humanity's struggle toward consciousness. His life, with all its sorrows and insights, becomes a testament to the mysterious wisdom of the unconscious, that nothing, not even pain, is wasted. The empath now understands that the essence of his gift lies not in carrying the world's suffering, but in transmuting it. He no longer absorbs blindly, nor sacrifices himself without end. Instead, he listens with clarity, feels with compassion, and reflects with wisdom. His presence becomes transformative not because he bleeds for others, but because he has learned to stand firmly within himself. He is no longer a mirror that distorts under the weight of projection, but a clear glass through which light passes freely. This transformation does not mean that pain disappears. The empath still feels deeply, still encounters sorrow, still faces the weight of human frailty. But now, he does not drown. He does not mistake another's suffering for his own. He knows the difference, and in that knowing, he is free. This freedom allows him to offer what he could never offer before, not martyrdom, but true compassion, not self-erasure, but authentic presence, not exhaustion, but steady love. And so, the empath steps into his final role, not as victim of his wound, nor as slave to his sensitivity, but as one who has turned burden into wisdom. He becomes a reminder to the world that even the deepest scars can become sources of strength, that even the heaviest sorrows can give birth to vision, that even the most fragile souls can become vessels of resilience. His life whispers a profound truth: the wound is the place where light enters, and the empath, in learning to embrace it, becomes the very embodiment of that light.